Before the video starts, I just want to apologize if the lights keep changing or if my shirt keeps changing. This is a pretty lengthy video to film in comparison to all of my other ones, and I had to kind of film it on separate days. So I'm sorry if that's distracting. Put that out of the way. I hope you enjoy the video, and thank you for watching.
Why should people care about Charli XCX?
Because I'm of the future and I'm making a really important record right now. So, yeah, you should care.
If I've ever had a single conversation with you in person about music, I've definitely brought up Charli XCX. She is undoubtedly one of my favorite artists of all time. I'm going to try and keep the synopsis brief. I figured if you clicked on this video, you have an inkling of an idea about this very niche time period from this artist's career, but I tend to get carried away when it comes to talking about Charli XCX, so we'll see how well I can restrain myself. Charli XCX is a British pop artist that originally got their start performing and producing mainstream pop music. Some of her notable hits throughout this era include Break the Rules, Doin' It, I Love It with Icona Pop, and Fancy with Iggy Azalea. While Charli could have very easily followed the mainstream wave and become an Ariana Grande type of artist, her career would do a complete 180 when the Vroom Vroom EP was released in 2016. The Vroom Vroom EP throws the traditional mainstream pop sound out the window, and we see Charli sing over glitchy electro-pop beats. This drastic shift in sound is the result of collaborators Sophie and A.G. Cook. The duo is known for founding the record label and art collective PC Music, which is focused on pioneering hyperpop, a very experimental genre of pop music. The best way I can describe the sound of hyperpop is that a traditional hyperpop song will have either very glitchy or distorted in-your-face synths with pitch-shifted vocals, or have an almost squeaky clean and polished sound that's almost synthetic in a way. Either direction the song tends to take, it will either be really experimental or fit into the mold of pop music we tend to expect by now. And my god, does anything birthed from this genre just slap so hard. Other artists that fit into the hyperpop umbrella would be 100 gecs, Dorian Electra, Sophie, and if we're feeling frisky, Blade. However, none of these artists are ever confined to this one genre. It's more so used as an umbrella term to describe the movement and the song's experimental sounds. Now, back on how this relates to Charli XCX. She would release 2 mixtapes in 2017, just a year after the Vroom Vroom EP. These mixtapes would heavily feature the hyperpop aesthetic and would mark a drastic shift in Charli's sound almost permanently. Those mixtapes would be Number 1 Angel and my personal favorite project from Charli, Pop 2. To me, Pop 2 is the epitome of, man, if pop music is so good, how come there isn't a pop music 2? And then she literally did it! Oh no, my queen. We need more Pop 2 supremacy in our lives, that's all I'm saying. Charli XCX would further push and experiment with not only her sound, but the idea of what could be pop music with her albums Charli and How I'm Feeling Now in 2019 and 2020 respectively. Now we're in 2022 and Charli has released her 5th album, Crash, and is pretty much at the top of her game, even going as far as to appear on late night television. Which doesn't mean much to our younger generation, but is a pretty big deal to an artist. Think about it, your grandma who still records SNL on her DVR has heard a Charli XCX song. Let that sink in. With all that said, there's something about Charli XCX's discography that has never sat right with me. Something that, for the most part, has been in plain sight. There's a noticeable gap between when her second album Sucker was released in 2014 and her third album Charli in 2019. That's a pretty sizable gap for a pop artist. Charli was extremely active during that period, if not some of the most important years of her career. For the longest time I thought that the answer was Pop 2 was her third album, but no, that's just a mixtape. The original intention was to release Pop 2 as her third studio album, but due to label pressure, it was released as a mixtape and toured over a handful of dates. So there we have it. Pop 2 was originally supposed to be Charli XCX's third studio album, but due to uncertainty from the label and the artist, it was just released as a mixtape, so there was no pressure. Roll the credits. But there's also a bunch of non-album singles that were released before the release of Pop 2. There's also a bunch of interviews from around this time where Charli mentions that she's working on her third studio album, including an interview with Nardwuar where she mentions that she's working on a really important record. At this point I started doing some digging. It seemed really unlikely that this elusive third studio album was hyped up for years only to be undermined as a mixtape with little touring and promotion, although I can forgive it because Pop 2 is a masterpiece. My suspicions were corrected when I discovered that there was a scrapped third studio album that we just never got to hear. Well, we did get to hear it, but we didn't, if you know what I mean. This is the story of Charli XCX's scrapped third studio album, XCX World.
One of my favorite songs that you have is Royals.
The earliest I could trace back talk of Charli's third studio album goes all the way back to a couple weeks before Sucker was even released. I mean, we're talking about the same person that put together this from scratch in the span of a month. In an interview with Time magazine about the release of Sucker, Charli goes on to mention her disdain for the direction of pop music at the time. Charli later goes on to mention that the direction of pop music is overdue for a change, and the mindset of trend chasing plus the homogeneity of the genre has grown stale and isn't going to be beneficial in the long term. Remember that talk about hyperpop from earlier? The interview later hints that even though Sucker isn't even released yet, Charli is already planning her next move, and it's going to be a complete 180. Charli later goes on to mention that her next album will be heavily inspired by Japanese pop music and sound like both Another Planet Up in the Clouds and intensely weird and childlike. Another Planet Up in the Clouds, huh? Fast forward to July of 2015, and Charli does an interview with ID Magazine. In this interview, Charli mentions that as soon as Sucker was done, it was kind of on to the next thing immediately, which she later mentions is pretty on brand, so nothing new here. She later goes on to state that she'd been working closely with the PC Music Collective and the close collaboration with Sophie in particular on the next album. Various producers, including Stargate, Blood Pop, and others, were also mentioned. We also get a hint at what this third album could entail when she mentions that it's the most pop thing and most electronic thing I've done. She also mentions in this interview that she can't live without Justin Bieber perfume, which I can't tell if it's on brand or not. A month later in August, and Charli XCX would cancel the latter half of her Sucker tour to focus on working on new music. Fast forward to October, and we finally got the first taste of this new mysterious electronic sound that Charli had been working on. The single Vroom Vroom was released as a lead single for her upcoming unannounced and unnamed album. When compared to a song like Boom Clap, Vroom Vroom is undoubtedly a drastic shift from the artist more commonly associated with the Fault in Our Stars soundtrack. Many fans were understandingly polarized by this new shift in sound, but many welcomed it, and hype for Charli's next big project only increased from here on out. In February 2016, the notorious Vroom Vroom EP was finally released. With the release of this EP, we also saw the inception of Vroom Vroom Recordings, Charli's own independent label, which has sadly been dormant since the release of this EP. This was intended to be Charli's own independent label that, to quote, will combine my love for bubblegum pop with mystery and darkness to leave a mark on pop music. Who knows, now that Charli is free from her contract with Atlantic, maybe we'll finally see this new independent label brought back to life. There's also a rumor that the Vroom Vroom EP is what became of the third album, however this isn't the case. In an interview at the time of the EP's release, it's very apparent that the Vroom Vroom EP wasn't the third album Charli had been building up to, as both this EP and the album are talked about as two separate entities. This EP was meant to serve as more of an introduction to the upcoming album, as these songs came from the same sessions. Later on in 2016, it was announced that co-founder of the PC Music Collective, A.G. Cook, would be signed on as Charli's creative director. All the hype surrounding this elusive third studio album would culminate in a September 2016 issue of Fader, where Charli would announce that the still unnamed album was done and ready for a 2017 release. In this interview, Charli goes on to state that she wants to make the best pop album of 2017. It wouldn't be long before we got our first taste of what XCX had waiting for us. Only a month later in October, we would finally get the first officially released single for the highly anticipated LP3, After the After Party featuring Lil Yachty. On November 10th, Charli would perform her now infamous show at the Exchange in Los Angeles, where she would perform many unreleased songs that were set to be on her third album. The main reason why I say it's a now infamous show because it spawned the only known live performance of Taxi. The fans really like Taxi. Charli, release Taxi! Other still unreleased songs from this performance include TKO, Bounce, and Hey Boy Hey Girl, which was supposed to feature will.i.am, but he failed to show. A really odd choice if you ask me. As we approach the beginning of 2017, it quickly becomes dawn of the final day for Charli's third studio album. The year immediately kicks off in January with a Rolling Stone interview where Charli notes that After the After Party is very reminiscent of what the new album will sound like, hinting that the album is going to be a big party pop album. Charli also mentions that she's going to be releasing a mixtape before the release of the album, so be prepared for lots of XCX in 2017 essentially. But that's not all. Charli finally gives us a release date of May of 2017. It's 2022 and I still don't have it. Where is it, Charli? In a February interview with iHeartRadio, Charli would quickly go back on the statement where she mentions that the album has been done for a while but won't be releasing until September. SMH my head. Charli would perform on Jimmy Kimmel Live in March, where she would perform a solo performance of After the After Party and the still unreleased Bounce. Also, strangely enough, for some reason, these performances were taken off YouTube. I found bits and pieces of them from around the internet, and I'll link them below in a paste bin which has all of the sources. We did eventually get that mixtape alluded to in the Rolling Stone article, as Number 1 Angel was officially released on March 10th, 2017. Now we just had to wait until September to listen to the long-awaited third album. right? Around late May, which was when the album was originally supposed to release, Charli would show a screenshot teasing a text convo with A.G. Cook that said that they were going to try to record an entire album within a day. 2 days later, Charli would give an entire track list, but just choose to not release the project. In the span of 2 tweets across 2 days, Charli would manage to excite and edge fans at the same time. This is some Kevin Abstract level trolling. That same week, Charli would do an interview with DIY where she mentioned that the album was being pushed to 2018 because there was a lot of other material she wanted to release before then. There was still hope, as Focus, No Angel, Girls Night Out, and Boys were all released as singles within the span of a month of each other, and were intended to be on the album. Little weird releasing this many singles in a month, but you do you, Charli. As I mentioned before, it was very quickly dawn of the final day, as sometime during late August 2017, the majority of Charli XCX's third studio album would leak as a result of some internal hacking. Also, remember that 24-hour album I was talking about earlier? Yeah, that leaked too. This will result in Charli scrapping the third album entirely and using the more current material to make the Pop 2 mixtape, which would eventually release around mid-December at the end of that year. Charli would eventually release a third studio album, aptly named Charli, in 2019, however that is unrelated to the project I'm talking about in this video.
Your most recent song is Boom Clap, and it's been really popular on the charts, but did you think it was going to be as popular in the STD community?
As the case when most musicians' music leaks, it was quickly consumed by the fans. Since, still at this point, the album didn't have a title, the fans would dub it XCX World, although there is some internal documents that suggest it was supposed to be simply called XCX. The tracks that were leaked were relatively high quality, arguably even the masters themselves. Eventually the stems for all of the tracks would be leaked as well. As for the actual songs themselves, XCX World is highly regarded by fans to be up there with some of Charli's best work. This explains why a push for an official release is so strong amongst fans. As far as what XCX World actually sounds like, it's very similar to Pop 2 in terms of sound and aesthetics. The songs really hone in on the party pop style, and the album overall is much more energetic than Pop 2, which is a statement I didn't think I'd ever say before. But I'll talk more about the actual album in a little bit, so stay tuned. So what exactly happened to Charli XCX's third studio album? It's a big fat mess of what ifs, and all we can really do is speculate. Forgive me because I'm gonna wear a tinfoil hat for a little bit. I think it's fair to assume that the album was going to release in one form one way or another, but XCX World as we're imagining it was quickly mutated into other projects and ideas for one reason or another. We went from Sucker to Vroom Vroom to all the way into the Charli era with this little carrot being dangled in front of the fans. There has to be more to the story that we can gather from interviews. Theory number 1. The album was going to release on time in 2018 before it was tragically leaked. This is the simplest theory and is assumed to be the one-size-fits-all answer as to why the album wasn't released. Charli later stated in a 2019 Fader interview that she would never release it because she feels like the work doesn't belong to her anymore. To quote Charli herself, that era has officially been tainted. An artist's work is very intimate and personal to them, regardless of the material, and they can choose to make it public if they want to. Sure, snippets and leaks are common today in music culture. Especially if you're a Playboi Carti fan, that's all you have to live off of. But not every artist wants that kind of transparency. While I'm glad I was able to finally listen to this album, and quite frankly, I listened to it quite extensively, I would have preferred to have received it the way the artist wanted me to, and not through a Reddit post that links to a Dropbox file. Charli made it very clear that she not only wanted to make the best pop album of 2017, but the best pop album that could define a very specific time in music. This was still during the first wave of hyperpop, and now we're on to the second wave where it's mostly Yeet rapping about minions, which is still pretty hilarious, it's just not the same. The photoshoot for the album, as well as a document, have also leaked that detailed the advertising campaign, as well as the overall aesthetic that this era in Charli's career was going to have. It would have been amazing to experience that as a fan, and I'm still down to experience it. Charli, you can make it happen. Theory number 2. As I mentioned earlier, Charli was already done with Sucker and onto the third album way before Sucker was even released. It wouldn't be out of the ordinary to assume that Charli put this era behind her and was onto other projects. She released an EP, 2 mixtapes, and multiple singles, plus she toured extensively throughout this era. Maybe she was just ready to move on. It's reasonable to assume that Charli was tired of sitting on this album and was onto other things. As Charli stated multiple times in interviews, the album was done and was ready to be released. It's reasonable to assume that Charli was tired of sitting on this project when she was already on the next chapter of her career. Theory number 3. Atlantic didn't want to release the album or wanted very strict creative decisions that would change the album entirely. This is the theory I find to be most likely the case in this situation. Keep in mind that when Atlantic signed Charli, they signed the True Romance Sucker era Charli XCX, not the Vroom Vroom era Charli XCX. So imagine you're a label executive and you find out that your newly signed artist, who has had big radio play from a song from the Fault in Our Stars soundtrack, has joined a very niche underground music collective that makes songs that sound like nightcore for an extremely niche audience. Uh-oh, you're gonna need some Flex Seal to seal up the amount of money that's gonna be drained from your wallet. Oh man, did someone say drained? Also, don't you think that something's a bit off with the 2 singles that were released to build hype for the album? Like, why is Lil Yachty on After the After Party? Don't get me wrong, his verse isn't too bad and he fits on the song just fine, but doesn't he seem like a left field pick for Charli's audience? There are finished versions of the song without him entirely. It just kinda rubs me the wrong way. It feels as if this was an intrusive decision from the record label to make the album more commercial. Not to mention Lil Yachty also peaked commercially in 2017, so everything kind of lines up. I just find it so uncanny that Charli XCX and Lil Yachty managed to bump paths. Does Lil Yachty even know that Charli wrote Royals? I always have a couple questions about Boys, the other single that was released around this time. Isn't it weird that it features no production credits from A.G. Cook, Sophie, or any other familiar names that were confirmed to be in the studio around the time Charli was working on album number 3? There are 6 unfamiliar songwriters that are credited, and Charli isn't even one of them. Charli doesn't even appear in her own music video for it. A.G. Cook and other familiar faces do, but that's mainly because Charli directed the video. It's almost as if she's making the most of the situation. It's also very apparent that Charli's output during this era was very undermined by the label. Sure, while Vroom Vroom was released as an EP, Number One Angel and Pop 2 were delegated to being mixtapes, which, based off a couple tweets from Charli herself, didn't exactly go over well with her label. I can also count on both my hands the amount of touring these mixtapes actually got. Pop 2 was originally supposed to take the place of the 3rd album, but was delegated to a mixtape again due to uncertainty from the label and uncertainty as to what the fans really wanted out of her at the time. Theory number 4. Charli leaked the album herself and has just been rolling with the story for years. The label was likely intruding on the creative process a little too much. To preserve the artist's original vision, it's very likely that the album was either leaked by Charli herself or an internal source to preserve the vision of the material and still get it to fans. Charli has stated in interviews that she has been sitting on this finished album for a while, and record labels have a history of releasing an album when it's convenient for them and not the artist. A similar situation happened to Death Grips when they wanted to release their 2nd album, No Love Deep Web. Again, I'm not accusing Charli of leaking her own album, I'm just saying it's a very likely possibility that something similar to Death Grips could have happened internally. But we're also talking about 2 different artists who happen to have some similar situations. It also wouldn't have been the first time Charli has taken a jab at her own record label. She talks down on record labels all the time and has done this in the Used to Know Me video. It wouldn't be out of character for something like this to happen. I still have no idea what the whole Justin Bieber perfume obsession thing was about though.
Have you had the clap before?
It's not something I've had, but many of my friends have had it, so I like to support them.
So what was the product of the XCX World Sessions? Was the album actually good, or was everyone drooling over low quality snippets? POV, you're a Kanye West fan. Many songs have leaked from these sessions, and fans have debated over a confirmed track list for years. There's also a large number of songs Charli has either talked about in interviews or played very briefly live that have also been confirmed for the album. There is this image of a fan-made conceptual back cover art that has been widely circulated and commonly assumed to be the official track listing. I personally think the album flows best with this track list, and all the tracks on this list in particular are always of the highest quality when compared to some of the others. It's safe to assume that this is the handful that was going to be on the finished album and are the ones I'm going to be covering. The track list is as follows: Come to My Party, Girls Night Out, Good Girls, Bounce, Taxi, No Angel, Down Like Whoa, The One I'd Die For, I Wanna Be With You, Can You Hear Me, Waterfall, Clean Lizzy, and After the After Party, without the Lil Yachty verse. Come to My Party is an amazing opener to the album. It does a good job of introducing the listener to the party pop theme and aesthetic of the album. I like how the song starts off relatively quiet with the hook before gradually introducing more and more elements until the beat hits you in the face when the chorus comes in. Definitely one of my favorites off the album. As I mentioned previously, Girls Night Out and No Angel were officially released, so I'm not going to discuss them too much here. No Angel is one of my favorite Charli XCX songs, so to discover that it originated from the XCX World Sessions was very fascinating. fascinating. After the After Party was also officially released, however, there are many different versions and remixes to the instrumental. The core of the song is consistently left unchanged from the version that was officially released. All minus the Lil Yachty verse, of course. Good Girls and Queen Lizzie are probably my least favorites off the album. Good Girls is an alright track, just not for me. Maybe it's because I'm not a good girl, I don't know. Nor do I identify as a girl in general, I just don't think I was the target audience for this track. The track has grown on me gradually, and while it's not my go-to track on the album, I do understand the appeal. Queen Lizzie is about someone, treating Charlie in this case, like royalty. This is one of the few tracks Charlie collaborated with will.i.am on and features him as a songwriting credit, which confuses me more than the Lil Yachty debacle. The beat is too repetitive, and with the catchy hook and chorus makes for a song I really don't want stuck in my head. Bounce was previously performed with After the After Party on the aforementioned Jimmy Kimmel Live performance. This song doesn't do too much for me. It's very clear that this song was meant to be played in the club with how the beat builds up and drops in between verses. Not a bad song, just something I can't really listen to on my own time. I feel the same way about Down Like Whoa. Finally, I make my way to the elusive Taxi, which despite never being officially released, is regarded by fans to be one of Charlie's best songs. I completely understand the hype. It's an infectious Sophie party pop beat with catchy lyrics. The One I Die For and Can You Hear Me are the ballad type songs off this album, or at least the closest Charlie has gotten to performing a ballad at this point in her career. I prefer Can You Hear Me more because you can really hear Charlie push the limits of her vocal range, especially in the chorus. The song itself is pretty tragic lyrically as well. It's about confessing your love to someone only to have them reject you and have the relationship stick to a friend basis. Which isn't that tragic, but I'm pretty sure we've all been there and it still hurts. Charlie also does some spoken word on the bridge, which I don't think she's done on any other song. I Wanna Be With You is a very hypnotic track featuring a very Sophie-sounding instrumental. There isn't too much to this track other than Charlie repeating I Wanna Be With You, which over this beat gives the song a very mesmerizing quality. To me, this track is the epitome of that black and white spiral that's supposed to hypnotize people, and I mean that in a good way. Waterfall is a track Charlie mentioned in a couple of interviews and described it as very strip clubby and sexy, but also emotional as well, which sums up the track nicely. The waterfall is a metaphor for dollar bills and various other things that could be wet. The track has an R&B nightclub aesthetic that makes it all flow nicely. Definitely one of my favorites off the album. To sum up my point, Come to My Party, Taxi, Waterfall, and Can You Hear Me are absolute bangers off this album. Everything else is a little too club oriented for me to enjoy anywhere but a live setting or was officially released. However, these are just my opinions on these tracks. Some other songs from these sessions I was able to dig up that I wanted to talk about real quick are Paris, Ring, Round and Round, and TKO. They weren't all the songs I was able to dig up, but they are ones that are worth noting. Paris is by far one of my favorite Charli XCX songs that come out of these sessions, and one of my favorite songs from her in general. The song is another party pop anthem about falling in love with someone from Paris, nothing too in-depth here. But once the chorus hits, it's literally ear candy. The flamenco type synth chords throughout the chorus work so well. It's so goddamn catchy, I can't help but play it a couple times after I've heard it only once. It's criminally short too, at only 2 minutes and 10 seconds, it leaves me wanting more in a good way. It has easily become one of my favorite Charli XCX songs of all time, top 5 for sure. Everyone's saying release Taxi. No, release Paris, I beg you. Ring is a pretty fun track that was recorded during these sessions. It's a bit of an outlier in this collection of songs because it was produced by Diplo and Skrillex, leaving many to believe it was from that Jack U album they did back in 2015. It's a shame because this song seems like it's tailor-made for a Motorola commercial. Round and Round is a bubblegum bass style song. It reminds me a little bit of Paradise off the Vroom Vroom EP, how it starts off normal with the pitched up vocals before going into a very Sophie style breakdown. This makes sense because it was believed to be a Vroom Vroom outtake. This was also performed live during a Sophie and Charlie show in 2016. After listening to it a couple times, TKO is just an early version of Trophy off the Vroom Vroom EP. This version was played during Charlie's infamous concert at the Exchange. While doing research for this video, I found that many fans want this version to be officially released too. I could get behind it, but the percussion and bass are so in your face and mixed poorly. I admittedly get whiplash while listening to it. It's a very rough demo. But yet again, this was never intended to be the finished song.
And you are Charli
XCX.
As a bit of a bonus, why don't we talk about the 24-hour album since it's closely associated with the XCX World Sessions and leaked around the same time. I was originally debating making a separate video about this, but I don't feel like there's too much to discuss, so let's dive in. The track list is as follows: 20 Steps, Party Party, In My Arms, Happy Now, Dreams, 7 Days, Everything, I Don't Wanna Know, and I Got It. Also, the fan-made cover that's commonly associated with the project is from the aforementioned performance of After the After Party on Jimmy Kimmel Live, which is a nice touch. The 24-hour album is so interesting to look back at because after listening to so many XCX World demos for this video, you can see Charli shift from the in-your-face party pop to the electro/future pop sounds of Charli, the album. I feel like I need to clarify every time. While this album is full of demos and features a lot of incomplete ideas, I found most of them really compelling and have a lot of potential. I'm definitely rooting for them to be elaborated on or touched up on in the future. XCX World? Nah. The 24 Hours album hype? Now that's where it's at. The track Happy Now has this weird Sega Genesis type synth on it, but once it picks up into the chorus, it becomes a really catchy 80s styled pop song. In My Arms sounds like it's out of the Pop 2 era in the best way possible. 20 Steps sounds like a song that would fit perfectly on Charli. It starts off sounding like a very radio-oriented Ariana Grande style R&B song before breaking down into a very A.G. Cook style chorus. A perfect mesh of the two, honestly. One of the notable tracks from this album is I Got It, which was later touched up and released on Pop 2. This version is interesting because it only features Charli on it, while the Pop 2 version features Cupcake, Brooke Candy, and Pablo Vittar. The demo version is interesting because you get to hear 2 short verses from Charli, while on the finished version you only hear Charli on the chorus. The only other notable track is I Don't Wanna Know, which is later touched up upon and released on Charli's actual third studio album, Charli. The version that appears on Charli is relatively untouched in comparison to the demo version. The instrumental is the exact same, with just the vocals and various other things being touched up and polished for the finished version. While it doesn't get as much attention as XCX World for obvious reasons, the 24 Hours album needs more love and attention brought to it.
And, I don't really know. I don't know. I don't have anything left.
So will XCX World or album number 3 eventually release? It's really hard to say, but I'd say it has a better chance of releasing now than it did previously. As I mentioned earlier in that 2019 Fader interview, Charli was very adamant about never releasing the album. Charli would also play the infamous Taxi at various shows during the Charli and How I'm Feeling Now tours, however this was really rare. On March 27th, 2020, Charli would host a live DJ set on the Grindr Instagram page where many have stated Taxi was performed, but the only surviving footage of it has the audio removed on YouTube, so I can neither confirm nor deny this. I can confirm that on April 24th, 2020, during Charli's DJ set on 100gex Minecraft Square Garden, which is a festival held entirely in Minecraft, typical quarantine activities, Charli did play a remix of Taxi towards the end of her set. No other XCX World songs were played, as it mostly consisted of songs from How I'm Feeling Now. Sadly, in January 2021, Sophie would tragically pass away after an accident in Greece. To say her passing shook the music community would be a drastic understatement. Sophie was not only a pivotal figure in the conception of hyperpop and the material we're talking about in this video, but key in pushing the boundaries of experimental pop. As someone who is new to Sophie's material as part of researching this video, it pains me to see that we've lost an artist and visionary so young. From then on out, it seemed like any hopes of XCX World finally releasing were completely done for. And for us fans, Charli's reasons were completely justified. It's very clear that Charli has a strong emotional attachment to her work. To not only have that work taken from you, but to lose one of your closest friends who is very intimately involved with that work. I'm pretty sure anyone will understand why she want to put this era behind her and preserve anything else that's personal to herself. Fast forward to March 18th of this year, and Charli would release her 5th studio album, Crash. Exactly 1 week later, Charli would tweet out, "Can someone send me a link to XCX World?" I mean, it's not like I have the files. I mean, as I stated in the beginning of this video, I've never listened to a Charli XCX song in my life. I'm innocent, I swear. How do you get hacked so hard that you lose your own copy of the files? This isn't unlocked. The replies to this tweet are absolutely hilarious, as you'd imagine. Luckily, the fans would send Charli the files, and luckily I didn't get a virus while clicking on any of them. As the Crash tour continued, many fans begged her to play Royals, and Taxi as well, which is typical for a Charli concert. At one show in particular, this really got to Charli, and she gave a very emotional explanation as to why she wouldn't be playing Taxi anytime soon. However, there were rumors that the venue PA was playing various XCX World songs before the show during the tour. The only real proof I had was someone posting a clip of Taxi being played before a show on YouTube. I feel like this would be a bigger deal if Charli was playing these songs consistently before shows. Was this just a one-off, or was she playing any other XCX World songs? The only real way to find out was to get a ticket for the Crash tour and find out for myself. Do you have the Charli douche? I saw Charli at the show in Pittsburgh and can confirm for myself she did play Taxi over the PA, as she exited stage left at the end of the set. What a troll. However, before the show, the PA was nothing but XCX World songs. The entire XCX World album was played except for The One I Die For, Waterfall, and After the After Party. It honestly felt like I was living in a fever dream. But how did the audience react? They were dead silent. I was the only one screaming "come to my party" by myself. There were a couple people who knew what was up, but still, maybe it's because the gap between fans that were introduced to Charli from Crash is much larger than those from before. But damn, I was expecting a standing ovation. Maybe it really only is me who cares about this. So what is the future of Charli XCX's scrapped third studio album? It's really hard to say, but I'd say the possibility of it getting officially released is increasing as time goes by. If the Crash tour is telling, it's definitely on her mind. Charli also fulfilled her contract with Atlantic with the release of Crash and is free to go independent if she pleases. What are my final thoughts on XCX World? I really enjoyed the album and would rank it higher in comparison to some of her other works. Not every track is necessarily for me, but the positives more certainly outweigh the negatives. It's also very hard to listen to club-oriented songs when it's just you with your headphones on, I don't know, walking the dog or some shit. Even though it won't have as much of an impact as it would have back in 2017, it's a very impressionable project that anyone can appreciate looking back. It's honestly a crime that we were robbed of this era in Charli's career. These songs deserve so much more love and praise than they currently have. I thoroughly enjoyed my time at XCX World, and hopefully one day more people can see what they've been missing out on. We've come a long way from Charli talking about the sour taste the project has left on her mouth to slowly embracing it as time goes on. And that is the history of Charli XCX's scrapped third studio album. Have you listened to XCX World, and if so, what do you think of it? What's your favorite Charli XCX project, and why is it Pop 2? Just curious, more Pop 2 praise is always appreciated. Thank you so much for watching, and have a nice day.
Too slow.